Her Bak Egyptian Initiate, Chapter 10. Hierarchy of the Netters. Night thinned into bright morning. Vapour rose from the ground, blotting out all shapes. The sage and his disciple, seated on the flank of the peak, were wrapped in mist. "It is good sometimes," said the sage, "to lose sight of earth and to be released from obsession with form." Her Bak answered like an echo. The man who was free of it could know the netters. Wasn't it here that Chickpea came to look for them? Chickpea didn't meet them. If Her Bak knew in himself the connection of cause and effect, he might find them today. The cloud is shifting. What do you see now? A thick mist that hides the valley. The river is invisible, and I no longer distinguish temples or houses. Why speak of houses, river, valley? If you see nothing, there is nothing, or perhaps everything. The mist that hides the world of powers from you is infinitely thicker than this veil thrown over what you are in the habit of seeing. If you assume the one, why not the other? Still, it's one thing to know the activating powers of the world in oneself, another to study the theory that explains their functions. Schematic descriptions have no life, but men live by the powers in question. They formed, moulded, characterized and signed you. Yet, whereas when you are looking into yourself, you forget the multiplicity of forces that went to the making of you. It happens the other way round, and when you are watching their manifestations in nature, you forget the sole source of which they are names and qualities. This is why analysis has its risks. The brain is quick to appropriate things, and set ideas hinder knowledge of their generative activity. Is there danger of forgetting the one netter in the many? That is the chief danger. But men need images. Lacking them, they invent idols. Better then to found the images on realities that lead the true seeker to the source. If the netters are qualities and functions of the unknowable one, can a man reach the source without having studied them separately? The contemplative could do it by simple fusion. A man closer to nature discovers certain powers, but the further thought departs from it, the further it strays, and the man who ceases to worship what he sees of the eternal in it worships himself. His thinking becomes the netter that destroys him. This danger is more terrible than any other. That's why I shall teach you now as our teachers were taught. I shall try to show you the harmony of the netters in a way that may itself be the key that opens a door to other meanings. It is said that 8 netters of the beginning, having formed the world egg, came to sleep at the foot of this peak, under its flank, awaiting each decade the visit of the great snake. Let us try to evoke them. All is in all, for all comes from the one that sees itself and divides. Before dividing, one is the primordial chaos that holds all possibilities in itself, and these have a dual aspect, passive, active. They are, in potential, undifferentiated. This state of fusion is the sum of the world's activities, negatived by their own passivity. For in this state nothing has precedence over anything. I can't name them without thinking, and to think is already to differentiate. The first name that can be named in this state of fusion is Nun, the force Un, which itself negativing itself. Un polarizes itself and exhibits what was in the, quote, waters of chaos, unquote, the principal spirit light, He, and the principal dark, Kek. Then there is Nu, the celestial water that generates and nourishes the world, Ammonian, invisible. Thus we have Nun and Nunet, He and Hehet, Kek and Keket, Niao and Niut. Four dualities in one that, quote, are, unquote, in potential before manifestation. The duality of these primordials exhibits the opposition that chaos displays when it divides, an original androgyny fused that is incomprehensible. But once the word is in action, the light principle arises and ipso facto brings about separation and manifests the netter creator that has power to separate and unite, manifest and annihilate, Atum, who makes the first evening and the first morning. Thus light and dark were contained in the principle. But when there are two, there is in potential a third, movement, and by cyclic movement of itself in itself, Atum Ra, self-begotten, puts forth the first two qualities, Shu, principle of the dry, Tefnut, principle of the wet, and these two become earth and heaven, Geb Nut. But the word creator puts Geb in opposition to Nut, and Shu, in his secret name of Re, separates heaven Nut from earth Geb. Then appears the unifying light of the word, Her, Reli, dualizer, evokes the complementary powers, and Nut gives birth to Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. Then comes the light of the ternary word. Horus, Ur, takes possession of the two eyes, sun and moon. The world becomes through incessant strife of complementary forces. Why has Ptah not been mentioned? Ventured Her Bak. Now I may pronounce his name, for he has manifested. I spoke of a principal creation before there was heaven or earth. Ptah is the first craftsman in the material creation and gives it continuity. There is an image of Nu, celestial water that generates and nourishes the world. Now this is the trunk of the Netter's genealogical tree. Ptah, active and causal principle, splits the trunk in two by his fall into corporeality, hence the image of the Trinity. Many branches spring from the two halves, but each keeps the character of the half it derives from, one abstract, the other Ptah's concrete. The first produces the netters of cause and activity, the second the netters of form. It may happen that the branches entwine as in marriage. But since everything comes of one, everything has one's original nature, which is incomprehensible unless it is manifest in diversity. What is real in the synthesis of functions will look, under analysis, like incoherence, an inversion of relationship. You may be sure, nevertheless, that absurdity isn't in the reality, but in the impotence of reason before the mystery of creation. The world is, and the world was, before you and your reason existed. These preliminary ideas regarding the hierarchy of the netters are but a summary which will admit of considerable elaboration. I will give you an explicit example of the way we conceive of the netters. I said that Atum Ra, self-begotten in the Nu, puts forth the two primordial qualities, Shu principle of the dry, Tefnut principle of the wet. But it would be wrong to see these two netters as absolute qualities. Nothing is absolute in what proceeds from the absolute cause. Essential fire, cause of everything created, doesn't appear before the first dualization. Shu and Tefnut are the first results of its polarization. The active phase of fire gives dry, the passive gives wet. But if one were to say that Shu is the principle of the dry, Tefnut principle of the wet, one must add at once that the one manifests the other. Wet witnesses to dry, and dry can only appear if it issues from wet. Wet, therefore, in the beginning is the earlier manifestation, although both principles derive from a single cause, original fire. It is the fire of Atum that produces the fundamental qualities, agent of their union, separation and annihilation, so that Atum signifies apparently incompatible functions, a totality of possibilities contained in a unity, annihilation, separation, linking. The four qualities that are agents of becoming, dry, wet, hot, cold, are but modalities of Atum's fire, opposition in manifestation. As all states of becoming change unceasingly, we can only depict a quality in its relative condition. It is always modified by another. Dry is the predominant quality of Shu, but Shu is also the warmth of wet that makes air. Wet is the predominant quality of Tefnut, and Tefnut is the cold of wet that makes water. But it is also the quality of contraction, cold, fire, through which earth comes of water. There is then a crossing of qualities between those two netters, and because of it, male dry has a feminine aspect and female wet a male one. That is why you often see Shu Tefnut symbolized by two lions, male and female aspects of the fire principle, which preside over the intermediate state at the beginning of the day and night, as at the beginning of creation. Are they connected with the dual lion Aker? The same principles are at work from another point of view. One of the Aker lions looks towards the light and the other towards darkness, opposites, like the qualities of Shu and Tefnut. Opposition necessitates a reciprocal annihilation in which a crossing of properties takes place, such that seeming destruction gives rise to a fresh unity that contains the two first principles, a unity that will itself split into two more. Why must it? Because in the process of becoming, none of the prime elements can remain unchanged. Each necessarily evokes its opposite and thus brings about mutual destruction of the two aspects that come in division. But in this process, each is seen as founder of a line in some determined activity. The essential modalities of original fire expressed in the two first pairs, Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, make them four, quote, founders of a line, unquote, and each will characterize every netter, thing and creature in which the primordial netter predominates. Thus, Shu is in direct kinship with Ma'at, and certain properties of Tefnut are found in Sekhmet. Osiris is called heir of Geb in respect to his earth nature, but he is Nut's son in respect that he is the celestial water of renewal. Likewise, Horus may be called son of Osiris and heir to the throne of Geb in his connection with earthly life, while he is son of Isis in respect that he is born of marsh water, and son of Hathor in that he is born of the sky. Her Bak had difficulty following the metaphysical implications of a myth, of which until now he had only known the symbolism. "Master," he said, "you have explained how the primordial principles beget and qualify what proceeds from them, but I don't see how a unity can be split." Don't be surprised at that. No one will ever understand this. It is enough to know that Atum's separative power continues at work in all his progeny. Just as Shu Tefnut are born of one beginning and division in the one, so they become the principle of beginning and division in all that follows. Shu, with his two arms, separates Nut from Geb, while Tefnut is that which is to be separated, the water of heaven and the fire of earth. Such division confronts our intelligence with a mystery that defies analysis. The crossing of qualities sets up a confusion of functions that defies our logic and can only be expressed in symbols. It is wiser to look for a synthesis in a symbology that reveals their vital effects. "I see the necessity for this," said Her Bak. "For reason is impotent in face of the mystery, but the history of the netters is meant to instruct us, so there must be a guiding thread if one is to get the connections, or there will be confusion for the genuine seeker, as there has been perhaps among the priests of various temples." "If you haven't the guiding thread, it excuses such suppositions," said the sage. "If you hold it, you will see their puerility. Begin by accepting an affirmation of which our teaching will bring proofs. There has been no strife between successive theologies, no competition between temples and towns for the preeminence of their netter, no opportunist adaptation to political ends. Human passions are always trying to interfere, certainly, but the unceasing watchfulness of our sages only allows them to affect our symbology in a measure and manner concordant with the rhythm of time. The ground plan, accordant with cosmic reality, was laid down in advance, and no one may innovate." There is an image of Shu separating Nut from Geb with his two arms. "I understand the main lines of it," said Her Bak, "but I supposed that the people had multiplied the netters of the earliest ages." "Theologically, the people can invent nothing. In the face of heaven and nature, observing certain phenomena, they may attribute a supernatural cause to them. They will never derive a theology from it. As to the priesthood, they change nothing except when they emphasize some utilitarian aspect to increase their power. An initiatory religion never evolves by adding fresh elements to the theological bases, but by analysing them. The theological form is always given by an initiate teacher with all the essential bases. When a revelation lasts several thousand years, names must change in conformity with what they stand for. To give a theology religious force, an inspired initiate often accords it a historical character And this isn't contrary to truth. It is impossible for a man who isn't inspired to make a revelation that is both suitable to the time and truthful. Master, will you tell me about the guiding thread? Her Bak entreated. So be it, said the sage. I will speak of it for your happiness or unhappiness. If your heart is simple, without pride, it will lead you to secret doors. If not, you will be blinder than before. Master, I've had experience of this. I listen. The sun rose. His rays dispersed the mist. His light gave the forms of things harsh outlines. There is, said the sage, an abstract history of the primordial creation. It pertains to the creative power and the phases of its expression, its successive, quote, words, unquote, in the principal sphere. And there is a concrete history of their actualizations in a series of procreations or begettings. The first relates to the divine. In the original unity are Her and Re. Each mirrors the other. As in the beginning, darkness confronts the darkness from which light will spring. Re looks into Her's face. This is the first opposition whose clash causes the world. Her is the light of the word. Re, whose manifestation is Seth, is the separator, destroyer, sterile, cause of the dualization through which the world is made. That is why Horus and Seth are called the two Re. Neither can exist without the other, for each causes the other. Their duality is repeated throughout nature. It is the principles of sex that causes birth and death. The first Trinity, divine, original, is indivisible and incomprehensible in its oneness. When we name the creative principle Atum, Amon, or Ra, we speak of a Trinity. Starting with it, we come to Ta and the celestial triads, each of which is the origin of a line of becoming in continuous creation. We have Horus, Hathor, Ihi, Ptah, Sekhmet, Nefertum, Amon, Mut, Khonsu, Osiris, Isis, and their son Horus. These are the principal triads, and all that concerns actualizations in these lines of becoming makes part of the concrete history. In the first, the abstract history, you will meet again the netters of the quaternary, the four pillars or constructive elements of the world. They are shown under four principal aspects, each quadruple, since a pure element is imperceptible. Their qualitative principle is given in the two first pairs, Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut. Their nature as innate factors is shown by the four bars in the column of Jed, that of Ra or fire, Osiris or water, Shu or air, Geb or earth. Their female, substantial, immaterial aspect is symbolized by the four women, Neith, Serket, Isis and Nephthys. Their organic, animal aspect is shown by the four sons of Horus, Amset, Hapi, Dumutef and Kebsenef. I will say nothing about the abstract number 5, which will one day be the netter of light for you. Number 7 gives the name of Sefket, whose signature is on everything in creation. You know already the 8 primordials associated with Thoth, and the netters of the Ennead. Number 10 is the triangle of the world of principles. The omission of number 6 deeply puzzled Her Bak. He remarked on it at once. This is doubtless an oversight on my master's part. The sage smiled. 6 is a secret number, he said. It has the character of equilibrium and at the same time of separation. It opens and shuts. But its meaning will only be clear to you later on if you make a profound study of numbers and letters. Her Bak apologised for his interruption and begged the sage to continue. The concrete history, said the sage, shows you the function of nature in process of actualisation. The two master functions result from opposition, which creates good and evil and teaches us natural science. They are contraction and dilation. To understand their symbolism, remember that a function in activity produces an equal and opposite reaction. Our myths and the keys to them will remain inaccessible to you if you neglect this. Thus, the scorpion cirque is in itself the principle of contraction, concretion. By this very fact, it provokes dilation. The scorpion symbolises this dual activity in its life and in the drawing that depicts it. It is strange, Her Bak observed, that it sometimes has no tail. What you call its tail is an elongation of the abdomen. If this is left out of the drawing, it is because the idea of poison is suppressed and emphasis laid on dilation. To understand their symbolism, remember that a function in activity produces an equal and opposite reaction. Our myths and the keys to them will remain inaccessible to you if you neglect this. The scorpion symbolises this dual activity in its life and in the drawing that depicts it. What you call its tail is an elongation of the abdomen. If this is left out of the drawing, it is because the idea of poison is suppressed and emphasis laid on dilation. The crocodile Sobek expresses a contractive quality. The idea is also shown in the root sak, where the saurian curls its tail. But the perfect symbol of contraction or concretion is sokar. Dilatation, I wonder if I've read that wrong. It's not dilation, it's dilatation. Forgive me. Dilatation belongs to Anubis. Apuat stands for a particular aspect of this function. The complete achievement of dilatation is called Waj. Anubis as jackal is the digestion that swallows even the bones and changes putridity into life-giving substance. The digestion of seed that kills and decomposes it in order to form a new creature belongs to Mut, a female principle that cannot give life otherwise. That is to say, without giving corporeal volume to the life impulse the seed carries. The first consequence is putrefaction. If the fecundated female principle isn't itself living, putrefaction becomes corruption, and Mut becomes death. Sekhmet, a form of Mut in her Hathor function, is an aspect of that which kills to give life. A pet Tawat, with the great belly and breasts of a nursing mother, symbolises abundance, maternal fecundity and concretion. She is the body and belly that contains what is in gestation. She is Also the principle of maternal and nourishing earth. Knum is the netter of conjunction. Heket of rebirth through renewal of leaven and of multiplication. If I wished to detail the aspects of the female principle, I should first have to differentiate its part in the principles that govern life from its functions in terrestrial existence. But I can't do this, as it is only the one that makes the other comprehensible. There is an image, figure 24, of 4 divinities, Isis, Nephthys, Sekhet and Neith, at the corners of a sarcophagus. The 4 sons of Horus, 2 of which are on one side and 2 on the other. In the centre, Inpu, or in brackets, Anubis. Its 4 chief aspects are depicted by the 4 goddesses, Isis, Nephthys, Neith and Sekhet. Isis is the female principle in nature, the site and environment of all activity. She is the magnet that draws forth the male seed, the active passivity of the female, mother of existence. Her fluid principle spiritualizes. Her tears reawaken not the earth body of Osiris, but its sublimation, from which the new water will flow in due season. She is the mother substance that gestates and nourishes Horus in the marshland, Horus who will reveal the spiritual face of his father Osiris. Nephthys is the negative passivity of the feminine. Of subtle nature, she corrupts to give life. She is immanent in Isis in her function as weeper, who brings on putrefaction and brings the digester Anubis into action. Neith is the life-giving, spiritual feminine, the dual and luminous energy, formless, that creates form by crossing of complements. Virgin, she is the birth that precedes birth. At the extreme of dilatation, she brings on contraction. That is why we place her symbol in a cobra's swelling breast. With her crossed arrows, she makes substance concrete. Her shuttle weaves the prime matter of the world, and Serket is feminine sexuality, the shadowy, contractive force that provokes dilatation and breathing. There is another image, figure 25. On the right, Nephthys. On the left, Isis, in her function as weeper, provides the putrefaction and thus will, quote, make, unquote, Anubis. Digest it. Her Bak made a point. When several functions are ascribed to the same goddess, how does one distinguish them in her image? Are her clothes always the same? Don't the 4 goddesses wear a variety of clothing, sometimes feathers, sometimes scales, sometimes women's robes and the fashion of their hair? If you are aware of principles, you must be blind not to see the main lines of their symbolic meaning. It will be your task to study each netter in its cosmic role and particular functions, to assign them a place in one or other of the 2 histories. But you will labour in vain if you don't see their connection in living unity. If you ignore this aspect, they will seem to you, as to so many others, a multiplicity of particular theogonies, discontinuous, unmotivated, because lacking in harmony with the cosmos. So it did seem to me, Her Bak admitted, I had lost all hope of understanding them. If you ignore the living unity, repeated the sage, nothing I have said will explain why the gods changed their names, why certain cults are modified or temporarily suppressed, why that of Ammon appears late in our history, why Eastern Anjeti becomes Western Osiris, and why certain characteristics of Mut and Hathor, Ma'at and Neith, are confounded. This teaching, key to the other two, is the theogony of the heavenly cycles. It corresponds with characteristics that arise from the ceaseless revolutions of the sky pattern and the movements of the sun, moon, and decanates, giving 4 cycles that closely touch our life: the day, the month, the year, the conjunctions of sun and moon. There are others, vaster cycles, among which note the one that pertains to the shift of the polar star, the, quote, great cycle, unquote. The netters manifest in the 4 cycles. It is this that gives rise to various theogonies and the complex structure of theology. The daily cycle accounts for several symbols or symbolic events and explains their meaning. Ra's 3 names: Khepri, Ra, Tum, and the character of these creative netters, or Ra's voyage in Nut's belly and on her back. The netters who accompany him are his boats of the day, or the entities in the Duat, whom he visits during his night journey, or again, the secrets of those abysses where the sleeping netters awake at his passage and fall back into sleep until the next visit. The daily cycle is an image of what happens in the others. The monthly cycle explains the triad, Ptah, Sekhmet, Nefertum. The lunar, solar nature of the scarab and its symbols, the meaning of Nekhbet's eye, and the lunar role of Hathor with 4 faces. The yearly cycle shows the passage of the decanates. The entire drama of Osiris, whose measure and key it is written here, as well as the metamorphosis symbolised by the ternary Ptah, Sokar, Osiris. Now, I will tell you something you will never find written. The 12 constellations divide in the heaven of north and south into 12 sections, which correspond approximately with the 12 months. In the great stream they describe 12 figures, shapes, or signs, which are named after the animal character they give to the months they belong to. In what I have called the great cycle, which goes inverse to the annual cycle, Earth comes under the influence of one of these signs for a little over 2,000 years. This period divides into 3, as the month does, but the beginning and end of an age are not strictly defined. To a lesser degree, they feel the influence of the ages precedent and succeedent. The quickening principle of each of the 12 ages is given the secret name that belongs to its sign. The reign of Mena took place in the age of the bull, Ka, whose characteristics are mass and stability, fighting power in neck and horns, generative power so fiery that it emits seed without movement. The first symbol of the Taurian age was the power Kem and Menu, lightning and irresistible fire. Then the generative and incorporative fire, which the bull, an incarnation of Ptah, befigures. Then the Neter Min of the powerful phallus, and finally Montu, who has the dual character of the falcon, Horus fire, of the fecund terrestrial fire, the bull. The bull acquired considerable importance in our symbology, for it is the animal incarnation of the principle that governed the primary organisation of the two lands. There is an image of two hands joined together and a cow. Statues dating from that time, Her Bak remarked, are notable for power and thickness in nape and neck. The pyramids have the same massive look. Just so, the character of mass and base, however, when the New Age began with the sign of the ram, one suddenly sees Ammon in place of Montu and Osiris becomes Western. Today the ram is at its apogee. Like our own history, its image fill our temples. Western Ammon's decline has already begun. Forgive me. Western Ammon's decline has begun, and already the gestation of the Ammonian sun, the young fire of the Lamb, is in process. That is why our great netter is now Ammon-Ra. And there is an image, I'm presuming is Ammon-Ra. Thus one sign succeeds another, imposing its symbol on earth. When Ra rises in the sign of the fish will be the new initiator's symbol. There is, then, neither fantasy nor utilitarian aim in these changes of cult and deity, asked Her Bak, to whom this conclusion brought peace. No, all is regulated in advance. Now, study the various theogonies. You'll find that one of the 4 cycles, which depends on one another, the smallest within the greatest, explains them all. For those who haven't the key, this creates an insoluble problem. Let us seek unity in diversity. Let us find the link that unites fundamental cults, Ra, Ammon, Ptah. The triad of Memphis, Ptah, Sekhmet, Nefertum, summarizes Ptah's incarnations in repetition of what was in the beginning. Through all the kingdoms of earth, from mineral to the human egg, the creator as Ptah forms earth, Tatanan, which absorbs him, and he is innate in it. He is netter of mines, smelters of metals, craftsman of craftsmen. But he is fast bound, without liberty of action in limbs and arms. Sekhmet is the magnet that draws him, the destructive power of earth that attracts Ptah's fire to her and delivers him. Sekhmet, Hathor's victory, is the conversion of Ptah into Hotep. His next metamorphosis that results from it is Sokar, whose chief function is concretion, after which he is reborn in his son Nefertum. It is said that Hapi, the sacred bull, is Ptah's soul. You know the triad Amun, Mut, Khonsu. Ammon, is in his absolute name hidden. He appears as Ra in the Nun and fecundates that which he was born. All the primordial earth gods came of his body. When as Ptah, Tanen, he gave them form. And Ra appeared with the face he shows to the east. Ammon is the creative principle in its aspect as aerial water. the world's amniotic water, as such, Western. Fecundator and nourisher, he is in nature husband of Mut, mistress of the lunar lake Asheru, and he begets Khonsu. Ra is one. He has several aspects but no triad. Atum is a, quote, moment, unquote, of Ra. In the second creation he becomes original man, Adamic, androgynous in Ra's image. Universal Ra cannot act immediately in nature, whose cosmic cause he is. It is then the Ra of nature, Atum, who works in his place, and his material body is the luminous, visible globe, Aten. The divine source of light we call Ra has his temple at Heliopolis. In his power of realization, creator of earth, he has his temple at Memphis. His life-giving power is fecundative and nourishing under the name of Amon. And in his name, as Amon-Ra, he sums up his dual aspect with all the netters that are potentially contained in his name that is ineffable. His temple is at Thebes. These three, Amon-Ra-Ptah, are one, three in one. But man can only know one in its qualities, which vary in manifestation with the age. Heaven is the great book in which Thoth writes them, and everything born on earth carries in Thoth's writing the astral qualities that are reflected in it. Every age is impregnated with one of them. The age that precedes our own bore the sign of the twins, and it was Thoth's domain. The followers or companions of Horus, who evolved with, or rather within him, formed the solar Horus seed, which corresponds in the becoming with the primordial creation. That is why the sun temple at Heliopolis was at the beginning of our history. The cult of Ptah at Memphis inaugurated the constitutive age of the bull. The reign of Thebes began in the age of the ram and grew in glory until the culmination of this sign. Thebes is the summit of our power and the end of our initiative mission. Such is the sequence of heavenly dispensations that influenced our development. The sage gave Her Bak time to arrange his thoughts. The disciple said, "When I was in the peristyle, a priest gave me a formula which I condemned as superstition. I'm afraid it was stupid of me. Repeat it, if you please." It runs, "Heaven's message is given at Heliopolis, repeated at Memphis, written in Thoth's writing and sent to Thebes, where Amon gives the reply that may kill or quicken. All is Amon-Ra-Ptah, 1 in 3. "You should understand this now," said the sage. "The theology of Memphis repeats the actualization of the primordial creation. For the gnomes, with their symbols in Thoth's writing, are defined and organized. The completion of our teaching is reserved to Thebes, and Thebes gives the complete revelation of abstract theology, with the inscription of all knowledge in its tombs and monuments. All that has been gained in the course of our long mission, all that has been realized, must be summed up there, which doesn't mean that other temples, thrones of the netters, may not inscribe details of the phase they represent. Thus, your formula is truthful. The answer is given at Thebes, where our revelation has come to an end. That is why it is said that the primordial gods are interred at the foot of our western mountain, the theological tree, all of whose branches obey the 4 cycles, embodies the creative principles and functions in their subtlest aspects. It reveals to the, quote, wise of heart, unquote, the harmony of the world of causes, inexplicable in theory. Symbols make these living images speak, and the perspicacious discover the vital directives that flow from them. Master, said Her Bak, after a long silence, dare I ask why you haven't spoken about Thoth or Ma'at? Have I spoken about Horus? Listen then, if you are disposed not to waste this treasure of the sages. In the beginning, universal Horus is in universal Ra. Thoth is his vizier, messenger who formulates his words. You find him everywhere. Ma'at, who links universal with terrestrial, the divine with the human, is incomprehensible to the cerebral intelligence. Her state is cosmic. She carries in herself the world's immaterial substance, which is of all ages. Wedge, base, feather are her emblems. Her symbol, in the shape of a wedge, drawn horizontally, is part of a geometrical figure that engenders the cardinal activity of number. As such, it is a, quote, motor, unquote. From a vital point of view, it symbolises, as it were, a marsh from which the earliest vegetation comes, and as such it is a base, the base of all things living. The wedge may also be drawn vertically, for Ma'at is the wedge that separates the heterogeneous from what has become homogeneous, as Shu separates Heaven Nut from Earth Geb in the beginning. And Ma'at's third symbol, the feather, is Shu's as well, for Ma'at represents in the corporeal creation what Shu signifies in the principle. Principial. As the world cannot be without Shu, so it cannot maintain itself without Ma'at. Shu proceeded from Tum, as Ma'at proceeded from Ra. As Shu is the principal fire of air, which gives earth the dryness of sand, and water the warmth that produces marshland. It is Ma'at who realizes these principles. Shu, elemental, primordial netter, is inseparable from humid Tefnut. Ma'at, daughter of Ra, is conjoint with Ammon in nature and action, inseparable from Ammon-Ra, in the continuous creation, where she ceaselessly regulates the two plates of a balance. She leaves the waste products of everything to Amit, who devours the dead, and at the same time she feeds the true essence. That is why it is said that Thoth is Ma'at's scribe. For the fate he writes, in characters that Seshat draws, is the true signature of impulses that Thoth transmits and Ma'at realizes. I try in vain to imagine Ma'at's nature and role, said the disciple. You speak as if she was at the beginning of things, yet still plays a part in the affairs of mankind. That is the truth, said the sage. But it is difficult for human intelligence to grasp the idea of unity in the creative source and the multiplicity evident in nature. The netters are spiritual powers, qualities of divine force potentially all that will appear, work, develop in creatures. They are states of a consciousness, which is not to be confused with the consciousness that results from existence. Their consciousness is a quality that enters into relations with things in a character that is invariable and doesn't change, as for example the quality, quote, warmth, unquote. Whereas the creature changes constantly in the growth of its consciousness, which is the road to liberation from its corporeal state. Ma'at is the sum of the netta consciousness, therefore the consciousness of the creative power. She is in everything, the individualization of causal activity as consciousness. She actualizes it. She frames the divine word and by her takes its names. And by the indestructibility of such consciousness, she is the triumph of life over death. But who am I that I should speak of the inexpressible? And who are you, Her Bak, that you should listen? Her Bak shook as if he had been roughly awakened. I don't know, he replied, to whom it was said. Ma'at is the food of nettas and men. But you have torn a corner of the veil. If Ma'at is the consciousness of creator and creature, she is the world's wisdom. I can enrich her with my own consciousness and feed myself on the cosmic consciousness that she is. The sage tasted with Her Bak this moment of truth. He gazed at the peak, lit strong by sunlight. Lit by strong sunlight, and said, "It seems that today Her Bak comes close to the nettas. The vital thing is, quote, to have known Ma'at, unquote. If you can hold this vision, you will soon be ready to learn her true part in man's life, and you will see how real was the understanding you had today."